Hey everybody, I'm Joe Mayers and this is the Think Forever podcast. We have an awesome interview coming up with one of our authors today, but first, one of our 5-star reviews. This one comes in from Mike May. It says this podcast is amazing. It is a refreshing and creative take that hooks you from the beginning. The interviews afterwards are just as enjoyable. Thank you so much for that review and for listening to not only the stories, but also to these interviews. And if you would like to hear your review read out, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review and maybe we can get that on the show as well. Okay, so today with us, we have author Laura Findley Evans. She is the author of fantasy novels about dragons for people aged 8 through 98. She's also my aunt. So Laura, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So one of the things that I've started to really enjoy doing as we start these off is just some basic rapid fire get to know you questions. You up for that?
Sure.
Okay, so first one is this. If you could teleport anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
I think I'd go to Ireland.
Ireland?
Yeah.
Okay. Wait, where in Ireland and why?
I don't know where exactly, but I find myself very drawn to Ireland and that area, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, that whole area. I see pictures of it or see it in a movie or something. I don't know, I'm drawn to it. I mean, partly it's probably genetic. I mean, Findley, come on, that's
Yeah.
Scotch Irish. I've never been. The teleporting part appeals to me because I'm not a big fan of travel. So if I could just be there, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Well, we can get into this later, but I feel like your books have that sort of flair around them. Okay. What book, other than the Bible or a textbook, have you reread the most?
Probably To Kill a Mockingbird. I've read that several times over the years. It's one of those that every time you read it, you appreciate it differently, appreciate different things about it. It's a classic, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. Would you rather take a mountain or a beach vacation?
Beach.
What are you still bad at no matter how hard you try?
Oh, gosh, Joe. I'm bad at so many things. It's not that I can't think of something. Let's see. I'm not a great singer. I'd like to be a better singer.
Well, I know for a fact that you do karaoke.
I do.
So
I do. But that's,
so in that context, it's good.
Yeah. No, I'm not great at algebra either.
Okay.
Fortunately, I don't need it too much in my life.
All right, last one.
Okay.
What are you secretly really good at?
Secretly? Oh, gosh. I mean, writing has always been my thing, but I mean, it's not a secret.
That's not a secret. Everyone knows you're a good writer.
Not a secret. What am I secretly good at? I'm actually pretty good at drawing. I don't do it much, but
That's something you enjoy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. Okay, so let's get into the real questions now. So first of all, the story that you wrote for us this year was really, really unique. And such a pleasure to not only read but also to produce. How did you arrive at doing a story in this way? Sort of like a play, like a radio drama.
Well, I was struggling a bit with writing this piece, and we can talk about that some more in a little while if we want. But I was really having a hard time. Fits and starts and paragraphs and deleting and all that, but I'm a reader as well. I read all the time. And I was reading a book called Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. And at the very beginning of the book, it starts out that all these people are interviewing for a community play, which is called, now I'm going to blank on it, Our Town by Thornton Wilde. And I hadn't read that play in a really long time. I mean, years and years. I barely even remembered it. And so I got that play out. It's incredible. It was written in 1938. And the way it was written, it was performed with the stage itself as the backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of building sets and all of that, the stage itself was the backdrop. And then they had a stage manager who basically just talked to the audience throughout the play
Mm-hmm.
as a narrator.
Yeah.
And I got so intrigued by that. I thought, I'm going to try this. I'm going to jump in and try writing about Katerina using this format.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it just clicked for me.
Yeah. What you said reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Stephen King in his book on writing. He said, if you want to be a great writer, you have to do two things. You have to read a lot and write a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds kind of like a no duh thing, but that's what happens when you do that, is that you're spending your time in other work, and this inspiration just sort of happens.
Absolutely.
And if you hadn't have if you hadn't been delving into other work that way, you probably wouldn't have had the thought to make this story the way that it was.
I'm sure I wouldn't. I am a big one, as all of us probably are, of saying I would never do something. I have said I would never write a script.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something, oh no, it's not my forte, it's not my thing. I will never do that. And sure enough, I mean, God probably laughs when I say these things, because he knew.
Go, I'll never do it. Well, you did a great job.
Thank you.
And coming from someone who has done a lot of plays and read a lot of scripts, I really enjoyed it. One of the things that I liked that you did was you gave a lot of the expository information within the dialogue. So the narrator had some setup and things like that, but you had this relationship between Katerina and Martin that was very playful, very bantery, and just one of my favorite parts about it was when he was sort of teasing her about jumping into the fish barrels, and she said, "Well, we weren't really in the fish barrels," and so we got that whole background of how the nuns left that convent without explicitly saying, and then the nuns got into a cart and they left.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that I love about plays that I thought you did really well.
Thank you.
Was give us that information. You also recorded part of the story
Yes, I
for
did.
us. You played one of the characters. What was that like for you?
Well, the way it was written would be the way I would tell the story, probably.
Mm-hmm.
In a writerly sort of way, I guess. But it was me, because even though it was a character in the play, it was actually myself that I was writing about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made it easier for me to write and to read it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had a feeling when I finished writing it that might be something we would consider doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a good thing. It was different. So
yeah. Okay. So let's back up a little bit. Let's give a little bit of context, because you and I have talked about this story a bit, but I don't think other people would necessarily know. You juxtapose two stories, two pastors' wives, and the first is obviously Martin and Katerina Luther. The second was inspired by, at least, your mom and dad.
yes.
So can you talk about how that juxtaposition came together?
When I'm going to back up a little bit.
Okay.
When we first talked about me writing a piece for this season, and we talked about the time, that period of time between 100 to 1500 AD,
Mm-hmm.
I struggled a bit with finding that person to write about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I started reading about Katerina, I knew about Martin Luther and the 95 Thesis and the Reformation, but I never even considered, did he have a wife? I never even read anything about it or thought anything about it. And when I started reading about her and how important their marriage was as a model for other people in that time,
Mm-hmm.
who were leaving the Catholic Church and struggling to deal with the fact that these ex-priests were getting married, I started thinking about my mom and the role she played in terms of supporting my father in his ministry and the ministry she did within our family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, yeah, it needs to be a two-part story because my dad was a Presbyterian minister, and so the Reformation led to a lot of these churches. So to me, it was just a logical thing to do to look at both of those stories.
Mm-hmm.
I chose not to use our actual names in the story, partly because I didn't want to take people out of the story. I wanted it to be stories. So that's why I gave them different names. Like my name in the story was Beth,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted people to be more into a fictionalized account, not like, oh, wait a minute, this is the person who wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate the background info. When you consider the role of Katerina, um, and the role that your mom had, um, I thought it was put in a really interesting way because it was sort of your coming to understand uh, the different roles that your mom played. That she was your mom, and she was in the house, and she was, making burgers on Sunday, but she was the confidant and really a sharpener for your dad.
absolutely.
That there wasn't any distinction between, this is my ministry and this is your ministry. They were doing it together.
Absolutely.
And the perspective of a child looking through the door and seeing mom and dad in there working together, and then the tornado
Mm.
and how they came together to care for the community together, where it wasn't just one and then the other. They were together in
They
all
were
of those
partners.
things. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And my mom, it really isn't in the story per se, but she was brilliant. Phi Beta Kappa, graduated from Grinnell University with top honors, editor of her school newspaper. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad as well was brilliant. And so in that way, they did sharpen each other. They did challenge each other in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
When you're reading something and talking about it. So it was an amazing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. I grew over time to learn to understand that a little bit better. And
Mm-hmm.
now looking back, for sure.
Well, I mean, on a personal note, it was a joyful thing for me to hear those kinds of things, because your parents are my grandparents. For anybody who forgot at the beginning, you are my aunt.
Yes.
And I never got to meet your dad. He passed away less than a year before I was born. But I did get to spend some time with your mom when I was young, before she also passed away. And so I've grown up with stories of the two of them and how enigmatic they both were. I brought something with me today that I want to show
did.
you. I didn't tell you this.
Oh.
You know what this is?
Oh, the dictionary.
This is this is the dictionary, and there's something written in the front of it.
I didn't know you had that.
Yeah, I've had this for years because it was on the shelf and I would always read it. There's little bits in front of every letter that are just about the evolution, the etymology of that letter over time and where it came from. And I always found that fascinating. So I would read this dictionary.
Hmm.
But is it okay if I use their actual names
Sure.
in
Oh,
this
yeah.
description? So this was a gift from your dad to your mom.
Mm.
And it says, "To Geraldine, true word lover who has taught me many. From Bill, April 30th, 1982.
Wow. I didn't I don't think I knew that that was written in there.
Yeah. And as I was reading this story, this is what I was thinking of, and the way that they valued each other's minds
Hmm.
in working together. Um, I've, this has made me think so many times about all the conversations that they must have had, and so for me to be able to read this and then read your story about it was really
Can I
special.
tell you a funny story about that?
Yeah.
Okay, so ev- in the story, we talk about the fact that we had burgers on Sunday in the little room, the little kind of breakfast nook.
Mm-hmm.
But every other night, we had dinner in the dining room, the formal dining room.
Mm-hmm.
We set the table with our green placemats, our,
Mm-hmm.
you know, avocado green placemats,
Mm-hmm.
and had conversations. And my parents were very good when we were young, being able to kind of talk over us if they wanted by using very high level vocabulary. And so
Oh
me,
no.
oh, that drove me crazy. It's like, wait, what did that mean? What did that mean? I know now that I learned a lot of vocabulary by trying to figure out what they were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as as the dictionary goes, if there were a conversation that was taking place and they would suddenly go, wait, what is the exact definition? And one of them would run over to that dictionary, in its place of honor with a spotlight on it and look it up. How cool was that? I grew up in a house where language was important and vocabulary was important and being specific and saying really what you mean, using the right words. So
Mm-hmm.
it built a great foundation for me, for sure.
Do you think that your mom's love for words and language inspired you on your trajectory?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, she didn't write much. I know she kept a journal, but she didn't ever spend time writing,
In a publishing sense.
right, or fiction that I knew of. But she helped me a lot if I were working on a story or a paper or something like that. She was a great one to run things by. But yes, that rich language, growing up with that kind of language in our home, absolutely built a foundation for me to become the writer that I have been able to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do a great job at it, and not only that, I think it's generational because, um, I've always had a love of books, but when I think back over times that have been very influential in my life, one of those was when I slept over at your house when I was a child, and I've always been a night owl, and I know that you are too.
Yes.
And when you're when you're in your parents' house and they give you a bedtime, and you're as a parent now, I know this, that bedtime is bedtime, because when you go to bed, then I get to have a little bit of adult time before I
For you, go to bed.
before I fall asleep. Now, so bedtime is very important, but when you're sleeping over at your author slash book lover aunt's house and you're a night owl, what she tells you, you told me, was that you can stay up as late as you want, but the only thing you can do is read. And it just it solidified the idea of reading as a treat
Hmm.
and an escape, and just an amazing, joyful activity for me. Um, and I don't know why that specific moment is just seared into my brain, but it is. Um, and so in the same way that I feel like your mom probably influenced you, in that way you influenced me, um, like that.
Very cool.
So I
Very cool. Do you
I
remember
appreciate that.
what you were reading at that time?
You know, I want to say this would have been about the time frame that I would have read this book. Um, but I can't tell if it was this one. The one that's coming to mind is Maniac McGee.
Mm.
Um,
Well, and I had that book, so I
yeah,
might have
so
handed it to you.
that yeah, I think that might have been the book
Yeah.
that you had given me, and I'm fairly certain I read the whole book. That I just stayed up and read it. and that became something that I would do. And when you're at a an 8 or 9 or 10 year old reading level, the books aren't huge, so it's doable. You can do 120 pages, um, but that's something that stuck with me. So I appreciate that,
Good.
and we can attribute some of that to your mom as well.
Absolutely.
Um, okay, so the title of this story is Helper, and I think it's an amazing title, especially in this context where you think of men like Martin Luther, the reformer, um, and your dad, and we can talk about a lot of the things that he did as well. Just a very powerful and influential man in a lot of areas of life.
Mm.
Um, but I I want to make sure that we understand the meaning of that word helper in the biblical sense, and that it's not at all detracting from the influence and power that these women had. Um, because when you look at the things that the way that you wrote Katerina into the story, and the things that I know about your mom, my grandma, and how influential she's been on all of our lives, I don't think that there's any doubt in the influence and power that those women have had. So could you talk a little bit about the meaning of the word helper and the role that's fulfilled there?
Well, for sure, in the Bible, that word is used. Even Jesus said, I'm going to send a helper for you when he was talking about the Holy Spirit coming.
Mm.
He referred to
Mm-hmm.
the Holy Spirit as a helper. And this idea, like you said, for Adam and Eve, she was a helper.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that passage in Genesis that was read at the end of the story, which I don't have memorized, but
Mm-hmm.
um, that that God ordained and recognized that men needed helpers to do what He had set out for them to do
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And in terms of Katerina, it's an interesting story because Martin Luther never wanted to get married originally. He said and I don't think at that point in his life it wasn't because something left over from the priesthood or anything like that. He was very busy. His life was being threatened at that time, and the idea of having a marriage just was not in the cards for him.
Mm-hmm.
But it was in her mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back then, first of all, it's important to understand that when a person left being a nun, for a nun to leave the convent was a big deal. It wasn't like, hey guys, I've changed my mind. I'm out of
Mm-hmm.
here. It was a big deal for them to get in that herring cart and leave. There were several other nuns that did.
It was essentially tantamount to divorce.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
because they were
Yeah.
considered part of Christ. But then it was like what they came to where Martin Luther and his colleagues were, and they were left. The men were left. What do we do now? Because back then, because it was such a shameful thing, a lot of the families would not take these women back.
Mm.
And even their own daughter, they would say, "No, you're not coming back."
Yeah.
And so they would try to find a place for them. And maybe as a housekeeper or a nanny or something like that. But several of them got married. Well, they were trying to find a husband for her, and she said, "I will only marry Martin." And he came to see it her way, and as the things we've read that he said about her, I mean, she was amazing, and took really good care of him, was a helper for him, was that person. She sat in on these what they call table talks with the
Mm-hmm.
visiting scholars and students. She was there. So the fact that she's there in that story, the story I wrote, is she was part of those table talks.
Well, Martin Luther uh, doesn't seem to have a very changeable mind. So for someone to be able to do that and to tame that side of him is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you look at um the story of these two women, and how were they in their own time having that eternal perspective? How were they thinking forever?
It seems to me we don't know a ton about Katerina
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, we know that she, raised pigs and gardened and those kinds of things. But I think the fact that she was so adamant about marrying him, she had to have known what and who she was taking on,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole situation, the threats on his life and the challenges of where they lived. They lived in an old monastery
Mm-hmm.
that, basically there was no one there anymore, and so he was allowed to live there, and pretty soon all these other people came, and she ran the place. I think she realized how important that his work was, and 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 his work not just out in the world, but his work within the monastery, with these visiting scholars and students that he was working with and the translating work that he was doing. I think she realized that and saw her role as taking care of him and coming alongside him and
Mm-hmm.
maybe challenging his ideas from time to time, during the table talks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then with my mom, she was a very strong believer. She realized how important the work was of the ministry that they had. And one thing that wasn't in the story, she taught adult women Sunday school classes
Mm-hmm.
on the Apostle Paul, which, let's take that on, shall we? Some of the books that he wrote. So, and then raising a family. Katerina and Martin had 6 kids.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents had four of us, your mom being the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of taking what is true and leaving it to the next generation,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. And I think when you see it in that broad scope, in terms of seeing like, hey, we're gonna think generationally, that's where that fits in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we've gone through these stories, but there's one thing that I want some clarification on that I had heard a little bit about that didn't quite make it into your story about the tornado. Can you tell me a little bit about how your parents went about caring for people, and what specifically, like, what your dad had to do in order to get out there on those
Yes.
front lines?
Yes. My dad actually was not supposed to be out there running around in the town
During the cleanup and aftermath
during
and all that, yeah.
the immediate aftermath, because the law enforcement just basically, no one's allowed, and I'm sure it was for safety reasons. But my dad had an honorary doctorate, and so he told them that he was Dr. Findley, and of course they assumed he was a medical doctor, and they let him pass the barricades.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to get to people and find people. Like I said in the story, there were people badly hurt, but the hospitals obviously were inundated with people who were more seriously hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would bring them, several of them, to our home and basically drop them off. And my mom would pick glass out of their hair,
Mm-hmm.
just, it was something that he was able to do by not exactly telling the truth, but I mean, he was a doctor.
Well, yeah. I mean, he told them that he was Dr. Findley, and what they did with that information was their business.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the clarification on the honorary doctorate. I knew that he was sneaking around, but I mean that I feel like that so typifies the relationship in terms of like, hey, we're on the same page. We're doing this.
We're doing what has to be done.
And not only that, but when you're a family in ministry, you're not just showing up on Sunday to preach a sermon or teach women's Sunday school. You're there to care for your community.
Absolutely.
And that's what every church should be doing. And sometimes the needs of the community are just physical. They're just people are hurt or they're hungry or they're cold.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be meeting those needs. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for telling us this story, for delivering it in such an interesting way. We haven't had anything like that before on the show. Where can we... Well, okay, let me back up. What projects have you recently completed, and where can we find them?
Well, I just published my second book in the series that I'm writing, like you mentioned, for kids. It's like that 8 to 14 range, but I have a lot of adults that say, you got to quit saying it's for kids, because I loved the book too. So
yeah, I love the book.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be a kid to like it. But so it's called The Dragon and the Girl. The series is. The first book is True North, which came out almost exactly 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then book 2, True Treasure, was released in November.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm going to be writing book 3.
Okay.
So that's my next project. And we'll see. I don't even know what's going to happen in book 3 yet. So I think I told you.
Along.
Yeah, I think I told you before. I'm what's called a pantster, which means you write by the seat of your pants.
Yeah.
You sit down and just see where the characters go.
You make a world, you throw your characters into it and see what they do.
Yep. A la Stephen King, right?
That is exciting and frightening to me. Okay, so what's the best place to find that? I'm assuming we can find the book on Amazon?
On Amazon, it's available in ebook. It's hardback, paperback, and audio.
Okay.
It's on Audible. And then Barnes & Noble carries it. So some of the stores may have them in stock, but in general, you just order them through them if you prefer.
Yeah.
It's also available on Kobo, for example. Kobo is another ebook reader, more attached to independent bookstores.
Okay.
Libby, if you're a Libby person, through the library, it's available.
And if we want updates on book 3 and what you're doing and everything like that, your website would be a good spot. What's your website?
LauraFindleyEvans.com.
LauraFindleyEvans.com. All right, Laura, thank you so much for being with us today. And for everybody else, thank you for listening or watching. If you're on YouTube, listening if you're on one of the audio platforms. We will have a new story coming up for you next week. Thank you again for being with us.
Oh, thank you for including me.